Okay, Giant team members. In this last video lecture of this module, and actually it's going to be the last video lecture of this certificate. Um, so it's kind of bittersweet. It's I'm sure you're very excited to be done. Um, but I know I had a good time putting this together. So um, I will miss some of this some of the legwork associated with doing this. So in this video lecture, we're going to talk about the process perspectives of change management. And if you remember back, we've talked about processes in different capacities in the past. And it could be decision making, could be motivation. And when we're talking about processes, we're talking about um, a much more comprehensive um, way of doing something or way of examining something. It usually involves steps and systems and subsystems working together. So really when we look at this process perspective of change, that's what we're really talking about. It encourages managers to take a more comprehensive approach to designing, planning, implementing, and reviewing um, change initiatives. And we've gone through a lot in not only in this course but just in this week's lectures with some of the different tools and the stage models and the checklist models. And if you think about it, they're really not that encompassing. There's a few elements that we've pointed out that could potentially be missing that this process perspective hopes to address. As Pettigrew wrote, there's no single causes or simple explanations for changes. So it's hard just to kind of say, okay, here's the one reason why we're going to change, or this is the one way that we're going to do it. There's no really simple explanation for some of those. The unit of analysis is not the change. Instead, it's the process of change in a particular context. So, these process perspectives really take the context of change into consideration, along with a whole bunch of other things that could be associated with it. They really talk about paying attention to the flow of events and not the start and end of a change initiative. And that's usually some of these other perspectives really focused on, okay, when are we going to begin, when are we going to start this, and then when is the end going to be, versus this flow of events that are going to happen, that are going to pop up, that are going to pop out of existence. And then the other one is not pay attention to the broader context of change and not a specific time or geographic location. And again, we do tend to think of change occurring, starting here at this particular place, machine two, whatever it might be. But there should be a broader context of change that we should be paying attention to: the substance, the context, the process, and how all these things interact with each other over a period of time. There's several process approaches that we're going to talk about, but um, they all have similar things in common. Number one, um, the past, present, and future context in which organizations function is taken into consideration. And remember, we talked about this a lot with the previous models. We said, well, the past really isn't taken into consideration, and it should be, because a lot of things that happened in the past shape the organization as it is now. So we should look at the history of the organization, and we should also be paying attention to future um, looking into the future farther than just the refreezing of the change initiatives that we do. We should take a longer perspective into the future. We need to really examine the substance of change in terms of scale and scope, including new technologies. We need to examine the political activities both inside and outside of the organization. Um, and a real big part of these process approaches deal with the political activities that are going on. But it's really one of the first perspectives to do that, because it sees changes uh, combating ideas, or people are going to be at odds and people are going to have different ideas with any change initiative. So, and again, that's both inside and outside of the organization. So the role of the change agent is to really make sure that you're securing support and helping to shape decisions that are being made, to try to really get a hold of this political activity. They really focus on the transition, the transition processes, the tasks, the activities, the decision, the timing, the sequences. All of those things have to be taken into consideration. Then the interaction of factors, both the change processes and the outcomes. What are the interactions of all of those things? And again, you'll see that a lot of these change initiatives have these similar elements and similar things that are in common. There's 8 lessons to be learned from the process perspective. There are no universal prescriptions or simple solutions, and there's no one best way. That's certainly a lesson from these process perspectives. Changes the political process. They really highlight that time, planning, and flexibility are essential, especially when you're changing the attitudes and behaviors of people. So this process perspective certainly takes into consideration the employees and their attitudes, and the timing, the planning, the flexibility are essential when you're trying to do some of these things, because they do take time, right? They take time, they take planning, and there's going to be changes along the way. It requires critical reflection. Don't just take your assumptions for granted. Really reflect on the changes and your beliefs and your values and the assumptions that you're making. You should learn from positive and negative experiences. There's a lot to learn from negative experiences. You need to align education, training, and development with the new operating procedures. So we have all these new operating procedures. Don't stick with the old way that we were training and developing employees. That might need to be changed and aligned better. Communication is vital and fundamental to steering the organization in a new direction. And change requires constant adaptation to contextual situations. Um, the context of the change is going to be very dynamic, and you need to be able to adapt with those changes. Some of the strengths of the processes approaches: they recognize the complexity of change, including the multiple factors that interact to produce an outcome. Treats change as a process with a past, present, and future, all of which have to be taken into account. And it highlights the political nature of organizations and the importance of change managers having those political. And then there's some minor limitations discussed. They can make change seem overly complex and unmanageable. So when you're taking every single variable, contingency, um, element into consideration, it can seem overwhelming. So keep that in mind. They make the role of people as active agents seem a limited significance in the face of contextual social forces. So it's important to remember the change is going to happen through people, and don't minimize the role of people. And they tend to produce generic rather than specific advice about what to do in a given situation. There's more of a focus on awareness of what's going on rather than that prescription of the checklist or the stage model, which pretty much just says, here are the steps, here are the stages that you need to go through, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The process approach seems to be more about awareness of all of the factors and elements that are going on versus a prescriptive approach to change. We have the contingency approaches. The contingency or it depends approaches challenge the view that there is one best way to manage change, and different contingency models focus on different factors as the key one needs to consider. So we're talking about a contingency approach. Um, there's certainly a lot of variables we could focus on, right? What's changing in the organization? It could be the people, could be external things to the organization. It could be cultural things to it. So what are those things that change, and what should we be focused on? And that's kind of where the contingency approach guides us. And Gardini 2011 says, look, there's components, key components to implementation, and one is to start with the pivotal people. Start with the people who are closest to the action, and who are familiar with the processes, and that's where you need to start with input and design and everything else. And then you need to design a comprehensive program with clear goals and clear roles, again, clearly defined. Oh, one of those contingency, there's actually three that are listed in the book. One of them is the change leadership continuum. And if you remember way back to our first class when we did talk about leadership, we really talked about leader orientation versus follower orientation. And that's kind of the way this looks at it. It's when is it advantageous to be leader oriented or even task oriented, and when is it advantageous to be follower oriented or behavior oriented? And there are certainly times when one is better than the other. If you have a strong need for change and it's kind of sink or swim with the organization, then that task or leadership focus is going to come in best. And the style would be kind of a telling style. And I think we talked about some of these before, where in that situation we're not worried about people's feelings or how are individuals going to be impacted by that. On the other end, we have the follower orientation when we invite people and we encourage participation and we're using all available information. And really, again, it depends on the context of what's going on that's going to determine the best leadership style for change, with the change leadership style continuum. The next one is the Stacy Dunphy in 2001, and this is one that's another one like our leadership style where we look at several factors, we place it onto a grid, if you will, with different quadrants, and we say, okay, if you're here, this is what you're going to do. If you're here, this is what you're going to do, and it focuses on two factors: the style of change. Are you collaborative and consultative, or directive and coercive? Okay, so that's our style of change. And then the scale of change: is it incremental or is it transformational? We talked about all of these things kind of before, and all we're doing now is we're saying, okay, we're going to put it into a grid. So the scale of change, we can go anywhere from fine tuning to incremental adjustments to modular transformations to entire corporate transformations. That's the scale of change. The style of change can go from collaborative to consultative to directive to coercive, where senior manager imposes the changes on the organization. And then again, if we put this into a grid, into a quadrant, I think it's listed on page 340 of your text, figure 10.3, you get these four strategies. It could be participative evolution, forced evolution, charismatic transformation, or dictatorial transformation. And each one of those, whichever one you choose, is really dependent upon the style and the scope of change. And each strategy is best used in a specific set of circumstances. So a good reference, if you're going through some kind of change and you're looking at the scope of it, and you're looking at the scope of it and the style of change, of the change leader, and then that will guide you on what approach you should take. Our last one is the Hope Haley ballot gun change kaleidoscope, and again, we talked a little bit about this. It's a very context sensitive approach. There's characteristics of the context that are more important maybe than others, and it really looks at it really looks at the context factors and how they could either be, and there's 8 of them, they could either be enablers or constraints to change. So for example, the context factors are timing, scope, need for continuity, diversity of attitudes, capability of the individuals involved, capacity of the organization, readiness for change, and power of the change manager. So those are 8 context factors, and they can be either enabling or constraining. So let's just take the capability of those involved. We could have highly capable people in the organization, and that's going to be an enabler to change. Or we could have highly unskilled employees who have no idea about change, and that could be a constraint to change. So we need to take all of these and really determine whether they're enablers or whether they are constraints to change. And then we're going to look at the implementation options in terms of type, start point, style, target, interventions, and roles. And then again, we're going to look at all of those things and determine our best way or our best approach to change. And the different change managers' perspectives or images it will be one of the deciding factors on the approach that's going to be chosen in these situations. Okay, so that's our final lecture. We looked at the process approach to change, and we looked at the contingency approaches to change in this lecture. And again, both of those really are taking a more holistic view of change, and certainly taking a lot of things under consideration when you're approaching a change project. Can seem overwhelming at times, but and it can be time consuming. It can be time consuming to consider all of these variables. But with the importance of change, especially some transformational change, it's good to take as many variables under consideration as possible. And even though these are not as prescriptive as the checklist or the stage models, they certainly do a good job of identifying all of the elements and variables involved in change. Okay, so I guess that's it. If you made it to the end of this video lecture after 18 minutes, congratulations. And I just want to tell you what a pleasure it was to do this. It was new to me. It was something I haven't done before in kind of the manner and the context of which it was done. I had a great time. I couldn't ask for a better class of individuals to start off with. Going through this, I've learned a tremendous amount, and I think I'm better on the other end of this. I hope you feel the same way. And I'll see you sometime in December, I guess, for the graduation ceremony. Have a good holiday, and we'll see you soon.